It was an unseasonably warm afternoon when James found himself standing in front of the small, ivy-covered house that had belonged to Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the elderly neighbor who had passed away just a week earlier. He hadn't known her long, but her sudden absence left a strange void in the neighborhood. The shutters of her windows were closed tight, and a light breeze rustled the overgrown garden that had once been her pride and joy. The air felt heavy with unspoken stories, secrets she had carried to her grave. James had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, a young man in his early 20s seeking a fresh start after dropping out of college. The world seemed overwhelming, and he had come to this quiet suburban street hoping to find solace in its unassuming rhythm. Evelyn Harper had been the last person he expected to connect with. She had a reputation for being reclusive, the type of neighbor who kept her curtains drawn and avoided small talk. But something about her intrigued him. Perhaps it was the wistful way she watched the street from her window, or maybe it was the faint smile she gave him the first time their eyes met. He still remembered the day they became unlikely friends. It was a crisp autumn morning, and he had noticed her struggling to carry a bag of groceries from her car to her front door. She was frail, her movements slow and deliberate, and James instinctively offered to help. At first, she seemed reluctant, as though she wasn't used to people offering kindness. But after a moment, she gave a small nod and allowed him to carry the bag inside. Her house had felt frozen in time, filled with antique furniture, faded photographs, and the scent of lavender. That day marked the beginning of their odd yet endearing friendship. Over the months, James began visiting her regularly. They would sit in her sunroom, sipping tea and talking about everything from the books she loved to the memories she cherished from her youth. Evelyn had a way of telling stories that made the past come alive, painting vivid pictures of a life that seemed so far removed from the present. Yet, there was always a shadow behind her words, a sense that she was holding something back. Whenever he asked about her family or why she had no visitors, she would deflect with a polite smile and a change of subject. The last time he saw her alive was a rainy Tuesday evening. She had called him over, her voice unusually urgent over the phone. When he arrived, she handed him a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age. "Promise me you won't open this until I'm gone," she said, her tone both firm and pleading. Her hands trembled as she pressed the box into his. He tried to ask her what it was, but she only shook her head and whispered, "You'll understand when the time comes." A week later, Evelyn was gone. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, though few seemed genuinely affected. She had lived quietly, her presence a footnote in the lives of those around her. James, however, felt a deep sense of loss. He hadn't realized how much she had come to mean to him until she was no longer there. It wasn't just the conversations or the cups of tea, it was the way she had made him feel seen in a world that often felt indifferent. The day after her funeral, James found himself alone in his small apartment, staring at the wooden box she had given him. It sat on his coffee table, unassuming yet impossibly heavy with the weight of his curiosity. Her voice echoed in his mind, "You'll understand when the time comes." He hesitated, wondering if opening it would feel like a betrayal. But the pull was too strong. With a deep breath, he undid the small brass latch and lifted the lid. Inside was a neatly folded letter, yellowed with age, and an object wrapped in a piece of faded fabric. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter, revealing Evelyn's elegant handwriting. The words on the page were both a revelation and a puzzle. "Dear James, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to explain things myself. First, let me thank you for your kindness. In a world that so often overlooks the quiet and the forgotten, you saw me. That alone has brought me more comfort than you can imagine. But there is something I must share with you, something I have carried for far too long. What you find in this box is the key to a story that has haunted me for decades. It is a piece of a puzzle, one I was too afraid to solve myself. Now, I am entrusting it to you. You are young, strong, and capable of seeing this through. Please, do not let my fear become your own. Follow the path it leads you on, no matter how difficult or strange it may seem. Trust that it will bring light to a truth that has been hidden for far too long. And above all, remember this: forgiveness is the most powerful gift we can offer, to ourselves and to others. Yours sincerely, Evelyn Harper. James set the letter down, his mind racing. He turned his attention to the wrapped object and carefully removed the fabric. Inside was an old, rusted key and a small photograph. The image was black and white, depicting a young Evelyn standing in front of a large, unfamiliar house. Beside her was a man James didn't recognize, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. They both looked happy, their smiles wide and unguarded. The key felt cold and heavy in his palm, its purpose a mystery. He flipped the photograph over and found a single word scrawled on the back: Redwood. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to make sense of it all. Was Redwood a place? A person? Why had Evelyn been so adamant about him finding the truth? As the evening wore on, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a sentimental gesture. Evelyn had been deliberate in her instructions, and the objects in the box seemed to point to something significant. He thought about the stories she had told him, wondering if there were clues hidden in her words that he had overlooked. The room grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon, but James barely noticed. His mind was alight with questions, each one more pressing than the last. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose, a drive to uncover the story Evelyn had left behind. Little did he know, the journey he was about to embark on would change not only his life but the lives of everyone in the community. The secret Evelyn had kept hidden for so long was more profound and far-reaching than he could have imagined, and the path to uncovering it would test his courage, his convictions, and his capacity for forgiveness. James stared at the key, feeling the weight of Evelyn's trust. He didn't yet know where it would lead him, but one thing was clear: he couldn't turn back now. James stood in the dim light of his apartment, the rusted key in one hand and the photograph in the other. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Evelyn's smiling face in the old picture, her youthful joy a stark contrast to the reserved woman he had come to know. The word Redwood on the back of the photograph felt like a breadcrumb on a path he wasn't sure he was ready to follow. But the weight of Evelyn's letter lingered in his mind. She had trusted him with this, and whatever truth lay buried in her past, he felt compelled to uncover it. The next day, James decided to dig deeper. The first step was figuring out what Redwood referred to. Was it a person, a place, or something else entirely? He spent hours researching online, typing variations of Redwood into search engines. The results were vast and unhelpful, a mix of parks, streets, and even a lumber company. Frustration began to creep in until he remembered something Evelyn had once mentioned during one of their tea-filled afternoons. It had been a passing comment about growing up in a small town several hours away. At the time, it had seemed like an unremarkable detail, but now it felt like a clue. James decided to visit the town she had mentioned, hoping it might lead to answers. The drive was long, the landscape shifting from bustling city streets to quiet rural roads lined with trees. As he approached the town of Willow Creek, the air felt different, calmer, yet heavy with a sense of history. He parked his car near the town square, a quaint area with cobblestone streets and small shops that seemed untouched by time. It wasn't hard to imagine a young Evelyn walking these streets, her laughter echoing in the air. His first stop was the local library, a modest building with creaking wooden floors and shelves stacked high with dusty books. He approached the librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, and hesitated before asking, "Do you happen to know of a place called Redwood around here?" The question felt strange on his tongue, as though he were chasing a ghost. The librarian tilted her head, thinking for a moment. "Redwood," she murmured. "There's an old estate by that name on the outskirts of town. It's been abandoned for years. I'm surprised anyone still knows about it." James's heart quickened. "Do you know how to get there?" She gave him directions, her tone laced with curiosity. "Be careful," she added as he turned to leave. "That place has a strange reputation. People around here tend to avoid it." The drive to Redwood Estate was short but eerie. The road was narrow, flanked by towering trees that cast long shadows in the fading afternoon light. When the estate came into view, James felt a chill run down his spine. The house was massive, its once grand facade now weathered and crumbling. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, and the windows were dark and empty, like hollow eyes watching him approach. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. James stepped out of his car, clutching the key tightly. As he walked toward the front door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trespassing, not just on physical property but on the memories and emotions tied to this place. The key fit perfectly into the rusted lock, and with a creak that echoed in the stillness, the door swung open. The inside of the house was a time capsule. Dust-covered furniture sat frozen in place, and faded wallpaper peeled away from the walls. A grand chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dull with age. James moved cautiously, his footsteps stirring up clouds of dust. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt drawn deeper into the house, as though it were guiding him. In the living room, he found a collection of old photographs scattered on a coffee table. Most were black and white, showing a family, parents and two young children, posing in front of the estate. One photograph caught his attention. It was a portrait of Evelyn as a young woman, standing beside the same man from the photograph she had left in the box. They looked happy, yet something about their smiles seemed strained, as if hiding an unspoken truth. James's mind raced with questions. Who was the man? What had happened here? He was about to move on when he noticed something odd about the photograph. The edges were frayed, and the back of the frame had been hastily taped shut. With trembling hands, he peeled away the tape and discovered a folded piece of paper hidden inside. The note was short and cryptic. "Beneath the roots, where the sun doesn't reach." James frowned, his confusion mounting. What could it mean? He read the note over and over, trying to make sense of it. His eyes drifted to the window, where the sprawling backyard stretched out into the forest beyond. Something about the dense line of trees called to him, and he felt an inexplicable urge to explore. Stepping outside, James followed a narrow path that wound through the overgrown garden and into the woods. The air grew cooler, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. He walked until he reached a large oak tree, its gnarled roots twisting out of the ground like the fingers of an ancient hand. He crouched down, examining the base of the tree. Was this what the note meant by "beneath the roots"? Using a stick, James began to dig around the roots. The soil was damp and compact, but after a few minutes, his stick struck something solid. His pulse quickened as he cleared away the dirt, revealing a small metal box, its surface rusted and worn. He lifted it out of the ground, his hands trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. The box was locked, but the key Evelyn had given him fit perfectly. With a click, the lid popped open, revealing its contents, a stack of letters tied together with a faded ribbon and a small velvet pouch. James opened the pouch first and found a delicate gold locket inside. The locket was engraved with initials, E.H. and L.M., and inside was a tiny photograph of Evelyn and the same man from the pictures. They looked younger, almost unrecognizable, their faces glowing with happiness. The letters, however, told a different story. As James read through them, a picture of Evelyn's past began to emerge. The man in the photographs was Leonard Mason, her first love and the original owner of Redwood Estate. The letters chronicled their relationship, from its passionate beginnings to its tragic end. They had planned to marry, but their happiness was short-lived. Leonard had been accused of a terrible crime, one he insisted he didn't commit, and their relationship was torn apart. Evelyn's final letter to Leonard was filled with regret, apologizing for not standing by him when he needed her most. James sat back, overwhelmed. The story was heartbreaking, but it also raised more questions. If Leonard had been innocent, why hadn't Evelyn fought for him? And why had she chosen to hide this part of her life for so many years? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the woods in shadow, James realized he was standing on the edge of a much larger mystery. Evelyn's story wasn't just about love and loss, it was about redemption, forgiveness, and the courage to confront the past. And for some reason, she had entrusted him with the task of uncovering the truth. Clutching the letters and the locket, James made his way back to the car. The air was heavy with the promise of more revelations to come, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was just beginning. Whatever secrets Redwood Estate held, he was determined to uncover them. James sat in his car outside the crumbling Redwood Estate, the letters and locket resting on the passenger seat beside him. The twilight cast long shadows across the dashboard, but his mind was too restless to notice the growing darkness. He had uncovered pieces of Evelyn's past, but the story felt fragmented, incomplete. The weight of her final wish pressed heavily on him, urging him to press on despite the uncertainty. Who was Leonard Mason, really? And why had Evelyn felt so much regret, even decades later? The drive back to his apartment was a blur. His thoughts churned with possibilities, piecing together fragments of a life he barely understood. He spread the letters out on his kitchen table, reading them over and over, searching for any details that might point him in the right direction. One letter, in particular, caught his attention. It was dated nearly 50 years earlier, the ink faded but still legible. My dearest Evelyn. I know you've heard the whispers and seen the looks in town. They all think I'm guilty, but I swear to you, I'm not. I need you to believe me. The evidence against me is a lie, planted by someone who wanted me gone. If you care for me at all, please don't give up on me. Come to the estate tomorrow night, I need to show you something that will prove my innocence. I can't trust anyone else. Forever yours. Leonard. James felt a chill as he read the words. Leonard had been desperate, pleading with Evelyn to stand by him. But what had happened next? Why hadn't she come to his aid? Or had she tried, only to fail? The letter offered no answers, only more questions. The mention of planted evidence intrigued him. It hinted at something deeper, perhaps a conspiracy or a betrayal. Determined to learn more, James decided to dig into the town's history. If Leonard had been accused of a crime, there had to be a record of it. The next morning, he drove back to Willow Creek and headed to the town's historical archives, located in the basement of an old courthouse. The archivist, a middle-aged man with a love for local lore, was more than willing to help once James explained his interest in the Redwood Estate. Ah, the Masons, the archivist said, pulling out a dusty ledger. That family had its fair share of drama. Leonard Mason, in particular, was quite the scandal back in his day. James leaned forward, his pulse quickening. What kind of scandal? The archivist adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages. He was accused of embezzlement and fraud, though the details were always a bit murky. The Masons were a wealthy family, but their fortune dwindled rapidly after Leonard's trial. He claimed he was framed, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. He left town not long after, and the estate was abandoned. James frowned. Do you know who accused him? The man shrugged. The case was built on financial records and witness testimonies. Some believed the accusations were orchestrated by a rival businessman who wanted to ruin the Masons. Others thought it was someone closer to home, maybe even a family member. People loved to gossip, but the truth was never clear. James thanked the archivist and left with copies of old newspaper clippings detailing Leonard's trial. The articles painted a grim picture of a man vilified by the community. Headlines like "Local Heir Turned Criminal" and "Mason Scandal Shocks Willow Creek" leaped off the pages. Yet, as James read further, he noticed inconsistencies. Witnesses had changed their stories multiple times, and key evidence had mysteriously disappeared before the trial. The whole case felt shaky, as if built on a foundation of lies. That evening, James returned to the Redwood estate. The sun was setting as he parked his car and approached the house, the letters and clippings tucked under his arm. He felt a strange sense of urgency, as though the answers he sought were waiting just beyond the crumbling walls. He wandered through the house, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls, until he found himself back in the living room. He sat on the dusty sofa, spreading the letters and clippings on the coffee table. The photograph of Evelyn and Leonard stared up at him, their smiles a haunting reminder of the happiness they once shared. James tried to imagine the two of them in this very room, their lives full of hope before everything fell apart. He picked up one of the clippings and noticed something he hadn't before, a mention of a safe hidden somewhere on the estate. The article speculated that Leonard had used the safe to hide documents related to his alleged crimes. James's heart raced. If the safe still existed, it might hold the evidence Leonard had wanted Evelyn to see. He stood abruptly, his eyes scanning the room for clues. The article described the safe as being hidden within the walls, but the exact location wasn't specified. He began tapping on the walls, listening for any hollow sounds. The task felt futile at first, but then, near the fireplace, he heard it, a faint, hollow thud. His pulse quickened as he examined the paneling. One section seemed slightly loose, and with some effort, he pried it open to reveal a small metal door. The safe was there, its surface tarnished with age. James inserted Evelyn's key, and to his amazement, it fit perfectly. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a stack of documents and a leather-bound journal. He pulled them out carefully, his hands shaking with anticipation. The journal belonged to Leonard, and as James flipped through its pages, he realized it was a detailed account of the events leading up to his trial. Leonard's words painted a picture of betrayal and greed. He had discovered irregularities in his family's finances and confronted his older brother, Edward, who had been secretly siphoning money to fund a failing business venture. When Leonard threatened to expose him, Edward turned the tables, framing Leonard for the embezzlement and ensuring the evidence pointed to him. Leonard had hoped Evelyn's love and trust would be enough to clear his name, but her hesitation to defy public opinion had sealed his fate. The final entries in the journal were heart-wrenching. Leonard wrote about his heartbreak over Evelyn's perceived abandonment and his decision to leave Willow Creek forever. "I loved her," he wrote in one entry. But even love cannot withstand the weight of betrayal. James felt a lump in his throat as he read the last page. Leonard had died believing Evelyn had chosen to side with the town's judgment rather than fight for him. But the letters she had left behind told a different story, of regret, shame, and a love that never truly faded. Evelyn hadn't abandoned Leonard out of malice, she had been paralyzed by fear and societal pressure, and her inaction had haunted her for the rest of her life. As James sat there, the full weight of the story hit him. Evelyn had given him the key not just to the safe, but to her redemption. She had carried the burden of her choices for decades, and in her final moments, she had entrusted him with the truth. It was a truth that had the power to clear Leonard's name and bring closure to a story that had remained unfinished for too long. But what was James to do with this knowledge? The journal and letters were proof of Leonard's innocence, but exposing the truth would undoubtedly stir up old wounds in the community. He thought of Evelyn's parting words in her letter, "Forgiveness is the most powerful gift we can offer, to ourselves and to others." Perhaps this wasn't just about justice for Leonard, it was about healing for everyone involved, including Evelyn and himself. The night deepened around him as he sat in the silence of the estate, the document spread out before him like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. He knew his next steps wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't turn back now. Evelyn had given him a gift, a chance to rewrite the ending of her story. And James was determined to honor that gift, no matter the cost. James sat in his dimly lit apartment, the weight of Evelyn's story pressing heavily on his mind. The leather-bound journal, Leonard's letters, and the stack of newspaper clippings were spread out before him, pieces of a life shattered by betrayal and regret. He had unearthed secrets that had been buried for decades, but the question lingered: what was he supposed to do with them? Evelyn had entrusted him with the truth, but sharing it could upend the lives of those still tied to this history. He considered reaching out to a local historian or journalist, but something stopped him. This wasn't just an intriguing piece of forgotten town lore, it was deeply personal. Evelyn had chosen him, a neighbor and friend, to carry the weight of her final confession. She had placed her trust in him not to sensationalize her story but to handle it with care. James realized he needed to tread carefully, ensuring that whatever he did next would honor Evelyn's memory and the love she had carried for Leonard. The following day, James returned to Willow Creek, feeling a strange mixture of determination and apprehension. He parked near the town square and walked to the small cafe where he had often seen groups of locals gathered, their conversations a blend of gossip and nostalgia. His plan was simple: listen, observe, and see if anyone still remembered the Mason family. The cafe was warm and bustling, the aroma of coffee and baked goods filling the air. James ordered a coffee and took a seat near a group of elderly patrons. Their animated conversation caught his attention as they reminisced about the past. It didn't take long before someone mentioned the Redwood estate. "Such a shame about the Masons," an older woman said, shaking her head. "That family had everything: money, influence, respect. Then Leonard ruined it all." "Ruined it?" another man chimed in. "You think he was guilty? I always thought there was more to the story." The first woman frowned. What more could there be? The evidence was clear as day. He stole from his own family, didn't he? The man shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe someone wanted him out of the picture. You know how people get when money's involved. James's heart raced as he listened, resisting the urge to interject. Instead, he waited until their conversation shifted, then approached the group. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly. "I couldn't help overhearing. You were talking about the Masons?" The group turned to him with curious expressions. "And who might you be?" the woman asked. "I'm James. I live in the city, but I've been researching local history, and the Redwood estate caught my interest." The man who had defended Leonard gestured for James to sit. "Ah, the old Mason place. What's got you interested in that?" James chose his words carefully. "I've been looking into the trial. It seems complicated. There are a lot of inconsistencies in the accounts." The woman scoffed. "Complicated? That boy was guilty as sin." "Maybe," James said, keeping his tone neutral. "But it seems odd that so much of the evidence went missing, and that the witnesses kept changing their stories." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I always thought Leonard got a raw deal. His brother Edward was the one who took over the family finances, wasn't he? And didn't he move out of town not long after the trial?" "He did," the woman admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't prove anything." James leaned in. "What if it does? What if Leonard was framed?" The group exchanged uncertain glances, the possibility unsettling their long-held beliefs. James knew he had planted a seed of doubt, but it wasn't enough. He needed to dig deeper, to find someone who could corroborate Leonard's version of events. Later that afternoon, James visited the local nursing home, hoping to find someone who had known the Masons personally. After speaking with the staff, he was directed to an elderly woman named Clara, who had worked as a maid at the Redwood estate in her youth. Clara was frail but sharp-eyed, her memories of the past still vivid despite the passing years. "Leonard Mason," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "He was a good man, always kind to the staff. Not like his brother, Edward. That one was trouble." James's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated, as though debating whether to speak. "Edward was always jealous of Leonard. He thought their father favored him, and he hated that Leonard was set to inherit the estate. I saw them argue more than once about the family business. The memorial became a symbol of reconciliation, not just for the Mason family but for the entire community. People who had once shunned Leonard began to see him in a new light, and Evelyn's name was restored as a woman who had loved deeply but struggled under the weight of societal expectations. For James, the experience was transformative. He had started this journey as an outsider, but through Evelyn's gift, he had become a part of something much larger. Her story had not only changed his life but also brought healing to a community long divided by the shadows of the past. As he stood at the memorial, watching the townspeople gather to honor Leonard and Evelyn, James felt a profound sense of peace. He had fulfilled Evelyn's final wish, and in doing so, he had found a deeper purpose than he had ever imagined. The morning was quiet as James parked near the newly erected memorial in the heart of Willow Creek's town square. The plaque, polished to a high sheen, bore the names Leonard Mason and Evelyn Harper, with an inscription that read, "Love and truth endure beyond time and tragedy." It was a far cry from the whispers of scandal and betrayal that had once surrounded their story. Yet James couldn't shake the feeling that the journey wasn't over. He had helped bring the truth to light, but lingering questions gnawed at him. What had Evelyn wanted him to do with her locket? And why had she chosen him, of all people, to carry her final wish? James found himself returning to the Redwood estate that afternoon. The house stood as it always had, silent, weather-worn, and full of secrets. The estate had taken on an almost mythic quality in his mind, a place where the past and present seemed to blur. He walked through the front door, his steps echoing on the dusty floorboards, and made his way to the living room where it had all begun. The locket was still in his pocket, its small weight a constant reminder of Evelyn's trust. He sat on the faded sofa and opened it again, staring at the photograph of Evelyn and Leonard. Their smiles, so full of hope and love, contrasted sharply with the sorrowful letters and journal entries he had uncovered. James traced the edge of the locket with his thumb, pondering its significance. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, he stood and began searching the room. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, another hidden compartment, a forgotten keepsake, some clue that would tie everything together. His gaze fell on the fireplace, the place where he had found the safe. Something about it seemed unfinished, as though it held more secrets. He knelt and examined the hearth, running his hands along the bricks until his fingers caught on an uneven edge. With a bit of effort, he pried it loose, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside was a small wooden box, its surface worn but intact. James's breath caught as he pulled it out and carefully opened it. Inside, he found a stack of old photographs, a yellowed envelope, and a single piece of jewelry, a delicate ring set with a tiny sapphire. The photographs depicted Evelyn and Leonard together, their joy evident in every frame. They were snapshots of a life that could have been, moments frozen in time that told a story of love and possibility. James set the photos aside and opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in Evelyn's familiar handwriting, though the ink was smudged and faded in places. To whoever finds this. This box contains the remnants of a dream. Leonard and I once imagined a future where we could be together, free from the shadows that divided us. But life had other plans, and we were forced to make choices that tore us apart. This ring was meant to symbolize our union, a promise we never had the chance to fulfill. If you found this, it means you care enough to understand. Please, let our story remind others that love and truth must always triumph over fear and falsehood. Share this with the world, but do so with kindness. Our legacy is in your hands. James's hands trembled as he read the words. Evelyn's voice seemed to echo in the room, her plea as poignant as it was powerful. The ring and the photographs weren't just mementos, they were evidence of a love that had endured despite everything. James felt a surge of resolve. He would honor her request, ensuring that their story was told in a way that celebrated their love rather than the tragedy that had defined their lives. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. James began compiling everything he had discovered: Leonard's journal, Evelyn's letters, Clara's testimony, and the contents of the wooden box, into a comprehensive narrative. He worked late into the night, determined to weave their story into something meaningful. He contacted local historians, artists, and even a documentary filmmaker, all of whom were captivated by the tale of Leonard and Evelyn. The response from the community was equally overwhelming. People who had once viewed Leonard as a pariah now saw him as a victim of injustice. Evelyn, who had been forgotten by history, was finally recognized as a woman of great strength and complexity. The memorial in the town square became a gathering place, where residents shared their own stories of love, loss, and redemption. It was as if Leonard and Evelyn's story had unlocked something in the town, a collective need to confront the past and embrace the power of forgiveness. As the project gained momentum, James found himself in the spotlight. Reporters and historians wanted to know how he had uncovered the truth, and he shared Evelyn's role in guiding him every step of the way. Yet he always emphasized that this wasn't his story, it was theirs. He was merely the messenger, the one fortunate enough to carry their legacy forward. One evening, James returned to the Redwood estate, drawn by a sense of closure he couldn't quite explain. He stood in the living room, the wooden box in his hands, and gazed around the space that had become so familiar. The estate, once a symbol of decay and forgotten dreams, now felt alive with possibility. He imagined Evelyn and Leonard standing beside him, their presence as real as the weight of the ring in his pocket. He walked to the fireplace and placed the wooden box back into its hiding spot, leaving the photographs and the ring behind. They belonged here, in the place where their love had thrived despite the odds. As he replaced the brick and stood back, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had done what Evelyn had asked, but more than that, he had found his own purpose in the process. As James left the estate for the final time, he looked up at the stars shining brightly above. He thought of Evelyn and Leonard, their love unbroken despite the years and the pain. Their story had changed him, teaching him the value of truth, the courage of forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. And though their chapter had ended, he knew their legacy would continue to inspire others for generations to come. Months passed since James had pieced together Leonard and Evelyn's story. The once quiet town of Willow Creek had transformed into a hub of intrigue and reflection. Tourists wandered the town square, visiting the newly erected memorial and the Redwood estate, which had since been purchased by a local preservation group and opened as a museum. What had begun as a forgotten love story and a hidden injustice had blossomed into a movement of rediscovery, as the town sought to reconcile its history and celebrate its humanity. For James, life had taken on a new rhythm, one punctuated by interviews, invitations to speak at events, and even a book deal to tell Leonard and Evelyn's story in full. Yet, amid the bustling activity, he often found himself returning to the quiet moments that had started it all: Evelyn's shy wave from her porch, their long talks over tea, and the solemn day he discovered her final gift to him. One autumn afternoon, James found himself invited to a town meeting in the Willow Creek Community Center. He had no idea what to expect, only that the mayor himself had personally extended the invitation. When he arrived, he was surprised to find the room packed with residents, from elderly couples to families with children. At the front of the room stood a podium adorned with a simple plaque that read, "Truth Unveiled, Legacy Restored." The mayor, a warm and affable man named Harold Green, called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've gathered here today to celebrate not only the restoration of a piece of our history but the remarkable efforts of one man who made it all possible." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat as all eyes turned to him. He hadn't sought recognition, his sole motivation had been to honor Evelyn's wishes, but he couldn't deny the pride swelling in his chest. The mayor gestured for him to join him at the podium, and the room erupted in applause as James reluctantly made his way to the front. "James," Harold said with a smile, "your work has done more than reveal the truth about Leonard Mason and Evelyn Harper. It's brought our community together, inspiring us to confront our past and shape a better future. For that, we owe you our deepest gratitude." Harold stepped aside, revealing a large, covered frame on an easel. With a flourish, he pulled the cloth away, unveiling a stunning portrait of Leonard and Evelyn, painted from one of the photographs James had found in the hidden box. The artist had captured them in a moment of pure joy, their love radiating from the canvas. Beneath the portrait, a brass plaque read, "In honor of love and truth." James felt a lump rise in his throat as the audience applauded again. He managed to thank them, his voice thick with emotion, before taking his seat. The portrait would hang in the town hall, a permanent reminder of the story that had once been shrouded in secrecy. In the days that followed, James began to feel a sense of closure. The book he was writing was nearly complete, and the museum at the Redwood Estate had become a place of learning and reflection for visitors from far and wide. Yet, even as the story of Leonard and Evelyn reached its rightful conclusion, James couldn't shake the feeling that their influence lingered in his own life. He had been profoundly changed by their journey, and he knew he couldn't return to the life he'd once led. A turning point came when James received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Richard Mason, the great-grandson of Edward Mason, who had initially reached out to James with an apology on behalf of his family. The letter was written in an elegant, thoughtful hand and began with an expression of gratitude for James's work. "Your dedication to uncovering the truth has inspired me to take a closer look at my own legacy," Richard wrote. "It's easy to carry on with the version of history we're handed, but you've shown me the power of asking questions and seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. I've come to realize that my family has the resources to do something meaningful in Leonard and Evelyn's name, and I'd like your help to make it happen." Intrigued, James met with Richard to discuss his idea. Over the course of several weeks, they developed a plan to create a foundation dedicated to preserving untold stories and supporting historical research in small towns like Willow Creek. The foundation would provide grants for projects that sought to uncover forgotten narratives, ensuring that voices like Leonard and Evelyn's were never silenced again. Launching the foundation was no small task, but James threw himself into the work with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The inaugural event, held at the Redwood Estate, brought together historians, community leaders, and residents from all walks of life. James gave a heartfelt speech, sharing how Evelyn's trust had set him on this path and emphasizing the importance of preserving stories that might otherwise be lost to time. As the event wound down, James wandered through the estate's gardens, which had been restored to their former glory. The air was crisp, and the golden light of sunset cast a warm glow over the scene. He found himself standing before a small fountain, its gentle trickle providing a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket Evelyn had given him. It had become a talisman of sorts, a constant reminder of her faith in him. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. "You knew this would change everything." For a moment, he imagined Evelyn standing beside him, her expression serene yet knowing. He could almost hear her voice, soft and full of wisdom. "It wasn't just about Leonard and me, James. It was about showing the world what love and truth can accomplish." As the sun dipped below the horizon, James felt a profound sense of peace. Evelyn's story, and Leonard's, had found its rightful place in the world, and their love had transcended the barriers of time and tragedy. Their legacy would continue to inspire others, a beacon of hope for those searching for meaning in their own lives. James returned to his apartment that evening, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing the final chapter of his book. He wrote not just about Leonard and Evelyn's story but about the lessons he had learned along the way, the power of truth, the courage of love, and the profound impact one person's trust can have on another's life. As he typed the final sentence, James felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Evelyn had entrusted him with her most precious secret, and in doing so, she had given him a gift far greater than the locket or the letters. She had shown him the transformative power of a story well told, a legacy that would live on in the hearts of all who heard it.